Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Fringe North podcast. My name is Caitlin Townsend. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the project coordinator for this year's festival. And I have with me here today Ryan. Ryan, would you like to take a moment to just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your art?
I certainly will. Well, first off, Caitlin, thank you for inviting me here.
Well, thank you for
My name
being
is,
here.
oh, my pleasure. My name is Ryan McFarling. I am a magician out of Sault Ste. Marie. I've been performing on stages, up until COVID all over the world, and I've been doing that for the better part of going on 20 plus years now.
It's really exciting. How did you first get into this?
See, magic is an interesting thing because I think all kids have some layer of or some interest in, magic and illusion, and I was no different. I always found, watching the Paul Daniels magic show and those type of things on TV, there was always just something that really drew me to that. And
Mhm.
I was also a very shy kid. So I remember trying to get ready for, when elementary school, when you had to do an oral presentation where you had to get up and talk about something for 5 or 6 minutes to the class. And I remember that used to just stress me out more than I could think of. And my dad actually said to me at one point, he said, "Well, you like doing magic tricks. So instead of trying to talk about things that you're learning right now, why don't you teach them something? Show your class a trick and do something." And I did that, and I realized that that scary room turned into something that was everybody was interested,
Mhm.
and I just realized in that moment, I think I want to do this forever. Like this is really
That's
fun.
awesome. Yeah. So, what element of magic were you most drawn to? Because there's a lot of different forms and like avenues even within magic.
It changes. As a kid, it starts with, looking at things you have access to. So cards and coins, and I mean, magicians call them coins, money, right? You're playing with that type of thing, or doing rope tricks and those little things. And I only say little things because as a kid, that was all you had real access to. Um, but it changes over time, and I think what I was really drawn to, I still love card tricks, and anybody that's seen me perform realizes it makes up a big part of my show because there's a universality to them that
Mhm.
it doesn't matter what language you speak or where you are in the world. When somebody takes out a deck of cards, even if they don't look like something you're familiar with, you still understand what they are, and they're a great tool for telling a story. So
Sure.
I've always been drawn to that, and also at this point, like I just in the process of actually pursuing magic and illusion, talking to people who are experts in their own style or in their own field of magic, so to speak. That's really that kind of takes you all over the place because some of the folks I get to talk to as a result of being in this community know sleights of hand that I could never perform, but it's more of how they think about it and how they see the world that is what I'm really interested in.
That's so cool. So growing up, who were some of your main influences that drew you towards magic and who influenced how you perceive magic and how you engage with it?
As a kid, I started with the Paul Daniels Magic Show, and that was actually one of the premier ones for me, mainly because he was this little guy who very like unassuming, and he looked like somebody's uncle or dad, and he just had this ability where he was well spoken, and he was fun to watch, and then he would just do these amazing things, but then he did it in such a way that it wasn't about fooling anybody. It wasn't about the idea, and I mean in the sense that it wasn't about saying, I can do something you can't. It was more of a shoulder to shoulder, let me show you something fun. And he would do that. And I remember thinking that is so much better than I love the styles where they're like it's a challenge magic as an example. But for me personally, I never I never wanted to have that presentation where I put myself here and the audience was
Mm.
here because I know it doesn't work long term like that, and I also know that it always left me feeling a bit odd. And from that perspective, like taking that style into moving up to a later period of time, like Teller from Penn and Teller, his theory on, although he doesn't talk in public, he talks a lot in the magic community, and his insights into magic and illusion are kind of a guiding light for me when I develop something. and part of it is because of how he sees the world, and I agree a lot with his philosophies on how magic as a form of entertainment should be produced and how it should be presented. But also how he puts that into practice with the act with Penn and Teller, and how they one of the things I developed, or I thought about for a long time when I was trying to develop my act and I would get frustrated. I would think back to an interview with Penn and Teller and Penn Jillette saying that they worked on an act for 2.5 years, and then they realized the reason why it wasn't working was because it wasn't Penn and Teller enough, and just had to decide that has to go off the table because I have a really fun piece of something and I'm trying to wedge it into a show when it doesn't need to, it shouldn't happen that way. So yeah, those have been those two in particular, and I mean, and obviously there's folks that I talk to every other day now that are performing with the Toronto Magic Company. I mean, Jonah Babbins and Ben Train and those guys that are just always like they're great ambassadors for this entire art form.
It's really awesome. Yeah. And like when you consider the different views that people have with magic and kind of like, I guess, almost like co-opting them into how you do yours, like how has that shifted over the years or like what is like your particular like niche within that and has it grown, has you evolved as a musician or did you kind of like find your thing and then stick with it?
You know what? It's a great question. The It's definitely evolved because like anybody watching any kind of art or watching anything really, like I'm learning at the same time that you are. And as my life experiences, they can't help but get weaved into kind of how I do things and how life experience plays a huge part in it, right? And that just I go through the same things that everybody else does. There's periods in your life where you feel you need to reinvent yourself, or you need to look at how you want to do things, or you get these new bits of information because we're always learning. So, and that's what I found was a lot of my magic changed from very straightforward, kind of very literal, as it were. Like it was this, we're going to make this card change from red to blue, and then it would happen, and try to find. And that was literally the talk track. And it was because the sleight was the most exciting thing for me because it was like I owned the tools and I want to play with them.
Mhm.
And then as I got older, and I realized although that's fun, that's a puzzle. And how do you make a puzzle into something more is you have to tell a really good story. And the story doesn't have to be long-winded, and it doesn't have to be, a story in the sense of formal novels and everything that way. It's more you have to take a premise and take a principle of magic and put them together and see what happens. And then what determine what you're trying to say out of all of that. And if it doesn't hit on, that those ideas that you're trying to, um, if it falls away, I guess I should say, from the premise or the plot of what you're trying to do, then you know that you have to keep working on it. And there's nothing better than when you finally work on something and have that piece, pull those pieces together, and all of a sudden it just clicks. And then, I mean, it's as a good friend of mine, J.K., says, it's like when you get into flow state, that's what you want to be in because everything just works, and that is the high for performing. I strongly believe that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. And like having your life experiences influence that and like that flow state being, I guess I'm imagining you probably have it a little more honed in now than you did when you first started. So if you could go back to yourself as that child who first started out with magic, what would your advice be, or what knowledge would you share with your younger self in regards to that?
Uh, that's a These are great questions.
Thanks.
That's that's something I'm sure I'm going to think about for a few days after this. Just some of the advice to a younger me. One of them would be, um, nothing is that scary.
Mm.
That's a good one. Um, that everybody everybody wants you to exceed as much or more than you want to succeed,
Mhm.
and that's a big thing too. And mainly because with a lot of this stuff, like and I'm sure you've heard this from artists regularly, that there's a nakedness you feel when you're doing this because you're one of the few people in a group that says, "Hey, look at me." And that's a really hard thing.
Hmm.
It's a really hard thing for a kid. And that's what I would tell me. I would say if I could go back and do that, I actually still tell myself that on occasion now. So, yeah, it just takes a little bit of yeah, it's that don't be scared of it. And also at the same time, when you get really frustrated with it, don't be afraid to put it down. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean you're quitting. It just it means you're going to give yourself a break, change gears, and it doesn't need to be, it's not like you have to put it down for a month. You can put it down for a day and say, I'm just not dealing with this today, and come back to it, and you will be better tomorrow. That's that's a big part of it.
Yeah, it's all fantastic advice. You had mentioned earlier that you were a very shy kid, so like this element of like essentially burying your soul on stage and like everyone can see those inner parts. How did you shift to become comfortable with that, and what was that process like?
I don't think I'm comfortable with it now. Uh,
Okay.
but I mean, I guess I'm more comfortable than I obviously was. But there's a vulnerability to doing that that is really hard to do until you're. I mean, some people, I guess they can approach it from different ways. I can tell you only from my personal experience how I approached it was I was often very guarded in how I was doing things where it was I would stick to the way it was I was performing something and I would only pick specific spots to be able to do it and because as you could imagine that magic and illusion is very it's angle sensitive there's a lot of different variables that I have to control in order for you to have the experience I want you to have because as an ambassador to magic and illusion what really happens on our end is that most people throughout their entire life may see one live magician. And one thing that's a very interesting fact about that where you have to connect with people on such a deep level to start from a performer's perspective is that if you hear a bad song it doesn't mean you hate music.
Mhm.
But if you see bad magic one time, you're more often to say I don't like magic.
Mhm.
And that's something that as magicians we have to be aware of because if I show you something and the illusion is broken or the presentation doesn't make sense or there's something that's disjointed, you may never come back to this art form again. And that's something where the opposite also holds true, where if you have an experience where that you're just blown away and you had a great time and you were able to really enjoy it and immerse yourself in the storytelling and kind of the vibrant colors that come out of all of that, you will actually look for it when you're out someplace because you know there's very few art forms that will allow you to have that kind of access not only into somebody else's life but into your own. And
Mhm.
it's a lot of fun that way. And so yeah, it's always a work as far as getting like the work is being comfortable with what you're doing and it's baby steps getting that vulnerability to come out because of a lot of what my performing style, I guess, was, and this came from a Penn and Teller lecture from years ago that I read, where the the act you see in front of you, like in my case, for example, the person that you're talking to and seeing right now is like just a couple of degrees different from the person I am when the camera's not on.
Mhm.
But it's just enough separation that if you just said I don't like magic, it doesn't mean you don't like me. You don't like that act, right? And
Mhm.
that is something that I needed to selfishly come to terms with because when somebody says I'm not interested, I don't want to see it, it hurts a little bit. But I have to also understand that it's the thing that's happening. It's not a personal thing, and
Mhm.
that separation is a can be tricky at times, and it's also just keeping that perspective, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like with I guess the magic community, how do you think that that influences like that I guess pressure that if somebody rejects one show, it's kind of like rejecting the whole art form. Does that change collaborations and how the magic community comes together compared to like other art forms, do you feel? Or uh, because I know like
Yeah.
some art forms can have that really competitive nature to it, but like if you know that you're representing kind of the whole community, yeah, how do you feel like that shifts and impacts how the community works together?
The beautiful thing about magic and illusion is that our community is very, very close.
Mhm.
I mean, and I mean to the point of when you're looking at things, if I wanted to learn a new sleight of hand, for example, and I know somebody, if I watch something on television, for example, and um, or it's a gentleman, for example, a perfect example of this is I was working on a trick, and there was a sleight of hand that's done very, very well by a guy named Jeremy Griffith, and he is a master of sleight of hand with cards. And our community is so tight. I actually just reached out to him after watching one of his videos, and it helped me with exactly what I was trying to do. So I just sent him an Instagram message and just thanked him for putting that out there and that he could do that. Within 10 minutes of sending that, I get a FaceTime call from him. And it was then we sat on the phone and chatted for, 45 minutes to an hour just because he was excited that somebody else was using something that he created. And that type of thing where what all comes down to, I guess, is that when you're doing that ambassador side, when you're performing, and it's not meant to be pressure to say that you should not do something like this because you represent, the art form as a whole. Also understand the art form supports you as a whole.
Hmm.
So we have the biggest thing where anytime somebody's working on a new act and where everybody's kind of when they ask for advice and you have all these different opinions and ideas and this collaboration that happens, it always boils down to the same thing, which is be yourself. Don't try to be the guy you saw on TV or the person you're watching on Instagram and all those type of things because you don't have the same skill set and experiences, but more importantly, he doesn't have yours.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing because when you accent the things that you bring to the table, it makes you unique and it makes you the most comfortable because you're playing in your own skin versus, I mean, trying to do the David Blaine act as an example. And I mean, that was one that I was guilty of where when that Street Magic special came out, I mean, it took the world by storm because it was a new way of doing magic that hadn't been seen before,
Mhm.
not on that scale and not for television. So, and then everybody started coming out with street magic specials. And what happened was, the people that you noticed were, quite obviously absent from it. Like David Copperfield doesn't do street magic, right? He can perform. He's an absolutely insanely talented performer. His wheelhouse is stage magic and grand illusion, and just having that, but also at the same time wanting to know how to do a card trick or how to do a specific sleight of hand in our communities. It's a matter of if you just ask the question, they're more than willing to help because they want you to be you, and if you're interested in that, that's part of it.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who is looking to get into magic and not knowing how to bring themselves to the table? And like, how did you uncover what made you you in that sphere?
Um, Coming to magic for the first time, if anybody's ever interested, I mean, YouTube is a wonderful example of this. And the most important thing with it is like, look at everything for the first, what's going to happen is that you're going to get into it and you're going to watch, some of the biggest acts in the world are going to be the people that come to the top first. And what I found was that you want to do all those things. Like everybody wanted to make the Statue of Liberty disappear when I was a kid, right? That was the thing you watched because David Copperfield did that, and then David Blaine, bit a quarter in half and did a bunch of these other things, and you could see all of that. And I would strongly recommend first and foremost, like go to YouTube, find the things that you're interested in, but then go to a library or go to like start with a book because and a simple book on any if you like cards, get just a basic card trick book. I mean, they're easy to find and they're cheap, and I recommend a book over a video for a specific reason. Books you get not only theory, but you're not limited by the runtime of 10 minutes for a YouTube video because it needs to hit these metrics and do all of this stuff. It doesn't. You don't need that. What in fact, with a book you get a detailed explanation, and a lot of the beginner books, for example, the Mark Wilson Complete Course of Magic is one that I started with, and it was literally pictures on one side, text on the other, and gave you all of the fundamentals of the toolbox you need to make magic. So, yeah, that's pretty well where I would go with it. Is I would start with books and YouTube and that type of thing, and then at that point, when you see somebody performing, if you see a YouTube personality or you see an Instagram personality, reach out to them. They may not always get back to you, but there's nothing better than being able to see something you really like. And you know what? The biggest thing which will make people stand out, especially when they're learning magic, is you watch the trick and you really like it. Thank the person for it, because they get more than enough people trolling them that are, I know how you did it, and this, that, and the other thing, doing all that stuff. The way you stand out is gratitude goes a long way, because at the end of the day, those folks that you're seeing performing on YouTube and Instagram and everything else, that is their art form as well, right? And we're kind of all in the same pool, and the best way to be invited is gratitude.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's not enough positivity in the world. So like
You
expressing
can
that
always
is,
use more.
yeah, for
You can
sure.
always use more. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you can think back to like your first ever show that you've done, going from like, I guess like that oral presentation at school would have been like the first, but changing to the professional sphere, what was that uh, process like to actually get up on like a professional stage? Or did it feel very similar? What was your experience with it?
It was it was completely terrifying and exciting at the same time. Um, because you never have it figured out. I don't have it figured out to this minute, but what I do know is I have things that I have different approaches and different ideas and different systems in place now that help me navigate different situations to be able to show this art form the way that I want to. Getting up on stage the first time for a paid audience and walking out there, I I don't know if I just blocked out what that was like, but it was, and I'm fairly certain a lot of that happened, or else I wouldn't be able to keep it together. But it was, I remember it being exhilarating because you had an audience that was interested in seeing the thing you worked really hard on.
Mhm.
And it wasn't, and I mean, I'm not trying to paint the picture like I walked out there and all of a sudden it was like, Vegas style and everything. Like there, it was a lot of like grandma and grandpa applauding at the end of all of this, because they are your safety net for all things positive, right?
Mhm.
Um, but it was getting out there the first time, and actually a friend of mine, Sean Sear and I did a performance, I believe, at Cora Collegiate, and that was um, my first real show where it was for a paid audience, and we did a joint performance there, and I mean, we had a blast, and I remember, shaking so much I could almost be sick before we went on, and we went out and did our thing, and the audience was great, and we had some of the magicians from around the city that had been that were in their some a few of them were senior citizens, and I think they've actually passed on now, but they came out to the show and had all great reviews for us, and really the thing I remember the most was it was all positive responses, even though looking back on it, like it's like anything, as you look back on it, it's really cringy, but they were excited about it for the same way I get excited when I watch, when I watch a young person try to get into magic, and they're working on something, and it doesn't look perfect because there's just not enough time for it, but the idea's there and the
Mhm.
effort's there, and that's the best, because it'll be something great at the end. And we're not sure what it's going to look like. None of us will, but it's worth the effort. And again, like the positivity goes, it works wonders.
That's awesome. So now that you have like a couple of years experience, or actually, I guess the question would be like, how long have you been doing this professionally?
More than 20 years now.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, mind you, as the styles change, or as I kind of delve into different things, I mean, I was always doing I always enjoyed doing close-up magic and doing things that were like that intimate style where the cards are in your hand, or if we're playing with elastic bands, they're on your fingers, and I'm doing like that type of thing. And I always really liked that because it was a way to connect with people, and you can make a lot of friends in a room when you're working a cocktail party, for example, very very quickly when you're doing that. And
Mhm.
it's also addressing the thing that most people um, are actually a bit weary of when you walk into a room and you don't know anybody. If there's an entertainer walking around and they engage you, and it's done in a way that's not putting you on the spot but just having you involved in something, I realized that was a thing that I really enjoyed doing, because I was as nervous as they were walking in. But when I found somebody else looking at me, looking at them, then that's all it took. Um, and then as it evolved, like for example, getting into the virtual side of magic now with COVID and everything, kind of forcing a pivot in the medium. this is, I would say, realistically, I'm probably 2.5 years into working, well, about 2 years, I would say, working in the virtual space, and it's like being a newbie all over again, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great, and that's like a lot of years experience that you bring to the table, which is just so cool to see that you've really like honed in on your craft, which is wonderful. So having done this for 20 plus years, and uh, I'm I believe you've been in like involved in the fringe shows before and whatnot. So what do you find unique from like that setting as opposed to like other professional settings, or even just like walking around cocktail parties and meeting people there?
See, the interesting thing is Fringe is awesome, first off. One of the things that I like in even preparing to speak with you today, I was thinking back on and I actually pulled my notes from when I did my performances at Fringe. The thing that stands out about the Fringe Festival that is totally unique from every other festival is you have full artistic license to do just about whatever you want as long as you mean it and you're going to stand with it. And that is an amazing thing because the more you get away from Fringe to, structured television, now you're down to every minute is detailed out for what you're going to do second by second, actually. And they want to make sure that when you get onto a mainstream media platform, if you're going to perform and they give you 8 minutes, you have 8 minutes, and it has to be tight, and that's what you work for. And where Fringe, you get to do all of the things that you want to do. You want to try out different ideas. You want to try out um, different different lines or work on different pattern, as magicians will call it, or just work on different ideas and concepts. That's your stage, and the audience is there for it, which is the best because they don't want to see. The audience wants to see, obviously, they want to see a great show, and they're there for a great show. And what makes a great show, though, is really the secret sauce because the shows from Fringe, they range from, ornate setups and elaborate setups of performances and theater to spoken word where you just have a pin light and somebody sitting on a stool and just saying something passionately and everything in between. And when that's done, where you see these artists and they own the performance and they're they are doing themselves the best that they can, and they have that passion behind it. The audiences are amazingly supportive because they will let you say the whole thing that you came to say.
Mhm.
You're not going to be cut off at the 8 minute mark. You're not going to be told that you can't, go into this line of thought or that line of thought, or it's going to be divisive or anything that way. You're allowed to go into those spaces because you're given that opportunity to actually have dialogue with the people you're performing for.
Mhm.
And it's an amazing thing because my first Fringe performance was actually what developed into the show that I was performing with Gateway Casino, which was Imposter and Evening of Stolen Magic Tricks. It came out of that Fringe style because I got to do Fringe so many times over the course of the festival. I do the same show so many times with different audiences and kind of tinker with things. And the biggest part of all of that, which I think for any performers that are thinking about getting into the live theater space and do that, is it's a great place to learn the entire business in real time
Mm.
because you're learning your ticket sales, you're learning all these different, and you have people around you that some of them have been doing this for years and tour all over the world doing Fringe, and you get to pick their brain on things, and they're open and inviting and accepting because you're not competing for airtime with them.
Mhm.
You're working side by side where they're often watching your shows and then you're watching theirs and then you're getting together afterwards, and it's an awesome community that happens kind of just like guerrilla style. It just pops up and that's what goes on, and it's, yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. It's awesome.
That's great. What has been your favorite experience with a fringe show,
Um oh, just to put it down to one.
or a couple if you have?
Yeah, well, I think the idea, like my from a performer's perspective, was there's very few times when you can go in when you're contacted or you reach out to an organization and say you would like to perform, and they say, okay, so what do you need?
Mm.
Full stop. It's not. Most of the time it's okay, we have a stage here and we have a mic, and it's not a it's you don't have a headpiece for this one. We're just going to have a microphone in the corner, and the lighting's bad, and we've got a whole bunch of things. You're in a ballroom and whatever. With Fringe, they were saying, how do you want this to be?
Mhm.
So what feel are you going for? And when I did my performance, we were actually in the Windsor Park hotel, and we had it set up where it was just curtained off, and it was like this black box in the middle of this space. And when people were brought in, they were brought in largely in the dark, and then everything came up from the back and it was all lit, and then they had this whole experience for an hour or 45 minutes where everything was going on and I was doing my thing and there was music and lighting and the whole bit, and then it all just went to black again, and that was the experience. And then everybody was brought out, and it was listening to the conversations afterwards. It's just so cool.
That's awesome. So what are you currently up to? I know you had mentioned earlier your virtual magic show. What is that like? And do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. So with of course the current scenario that we're all in, looking for ways to selfishly burn off a lot of the entertainer's energy that's been pent up for the better part of 18 months. Um, I went through I'm sure a swing that a lot of performers have gone through, where you went through at the beginning of the pandemic. They went from a performing perspective. You were kind of grateful a little bit for the time off, just to where everything was so different, but you got to at least mentally rest short term. And then it went to a kind of a depressive type of state for quite a while, because the worst thing is sitting on your hands and never knowing when you're going to get to do what you want to do again, without letting it go in both directions, where it's going to happen right away or it's never going to happen. You want to keep those two lines of thought out of your head. And at this point, I went more than a year, and then I thought I need to start doing something. Like, it's the whole world of magic and illusion hasn't stopped. So, what are the people that are doing? What are they actually doing right now? And that was a big impetus of that was the Toronto Magic Company, which Ben Train and Jonah Babbins were like, they right away pivoted into virtual, and they started building virtual shows and doing this type of thing, and they're performing insane amount of shows doing this. And so I just called them and said, what do you know? Teach me everything. And they started walking through kind of the philosophy of it, and how they put things together, and why they do some things the way that they do, and some of the tech stuff that they work on. And really what it boiled down to was, this medium of doing a virtual show is not um, it's not as scary as it was when I started, but what it really allows us to do is things totally differently, because I can do stage act type of things or close up, and it's all the same for you watching on that end, which is amazing because it gives you access you wouldn't normally have as a viewer. And it as pivoting all of that stuff, pivoting into this space, and then looking at it and saying, at first I was afraid that when I did a virtual act that it was going to feel like I was performing in front of a TV, because the one thing you don't get is that kind of reaction from people. Because for me to be talking, and for all the video to be right, especially if you're using a platform like Zoom or something like that, you have to have everybody muted. And I'm used to hitting a point, and you hear the oohs and the ahs, and then everybody laughing, and you don't have any of that here. It's you hear crickets. And so but there was those little adjustments, and then and working together, of course, on all different ways to kind of make that experience better for the people that are sitting at home. Because unlike a theater, you have all the distractions of normal life around you, and a magic show, where when I bring you into a theater, you are bound by the walls of the theater, and now I'm your focus of attention. So there's different things that have to be adjusted for that, of course.
Mhm. Yeah, and how long did it take you to kind of develop this process from having the idea of like, oh, I'm going to reach out and find what options are there, to actually having like a finished show that you know how to run now?
It took about 6 months of adjusting the sleight of hand so that the show made sense. Because a lot of the interaction that happens when you're talking to an audience, for example, it's in the turning, and you're bantering with people and doing things, and a lot of misdirection. And what allows you to do the magic trick is built into those movements, what we would call the offbeats of being able to do things, where the camera doesn't blink. So everything you know, has to be tight, has to be clear and concise, and you have to bring that same level of energy to, through a screen. And the 6 months of working on that were kind of, it was 50-50, where it was working on the sleight of hand to be able to tell the story and do it in such a way where the angles are all different. Because if I want to show you that overhead look, as we were talking about earlier, those have different limitations and everything that way. And then also the tech side of being able to make that actually work. And how do you make it repeatable, and how do you add value to it versus just a screen that, they're watching, view into someone else's house, and that may be interesting for a minute, but where the interest has to grow, and you have to have that staging, because this kind of box you're watching right now is essentially limitless when you go in all directions, right? And we don't think of it that way. Magicians do, but most people don't. So it's actually opened up a world of opportunities that I'm still exploring, because there's so many things I can do that I don't have enough time in a day to actually, work on all the things that I want to try.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about like making adjustments, is that more in terms of like how you perform each trick, or have you actually shifted which tricks you're doing on screen as opposed to in person?
Oh, absolutely. The thought process has to change entirely. When you're doing
Mm,
virtual magic or you're doing any kind of virtual performance, it's really key to have one or two sentences that kind of guide you to how you develop your show. And what I mean by that is, the sentence I use all the time is, "What is the audience seeing?" And not from a sleight of hand, like, am I hiding all the moves and doing all that? I'm not thinking like that. I'm thinking visually, what does this look like to the person sitting at home that also has the distraction of, family life going on, and the dog and your phone and all this other stuff? Why do they care what they're seeing right now?
mm,
And or why should they care what they're seeing right now? And that goes part and parcel with the live stage part whenever we're writing our shows. And there's always the one line, "But who cares?" And because if you can do all these really fancy card tricks as an example, but you haven't said anything, who cares? And it has to matter. At least to me, it has to matter, because if it matters to me, I can pull that out of and show you why, at the very least, why it matters to me, which should be interesting.
mhm,
And that's where essentially a lot of what we do here. The other beauty is, from a Zoom or from just a video perspective, I don't know a performer that doesn't benefit from filming themselves.
mm,
It is nightmarish, and it is possibly the cringiest thing you're going to feel ever. And I still hate it to this day. But every performance that I do, we go back and we watch it, and we painstakingly take it apart, because it needs to be better than next time. And I'm not talking 20% better, 1%. I need to move the needle by 1% for each show, so that um, it'll get that much better every single time. And I think that a lot of artists shy away from the filming aspect of it, because it's very uncomfortable, and it's because it exposes all the flaws at one time, and a lot of us aren't ready for that. And, but I promise you, it is not nearly as bad as you think it is. And once you develop that kind of that callus to it, which takes only a couple of times. You watch yourself do one thing, and then you're looking for things specific within your act, whether it's how you said something, how you moved, what your background looked like. Maybe you found you didn't frame yourself properly, and only after you watched it you realize, you know what, I was off center the whole time. I really should have been over here. Okay,
mm,
now this is better. And when you start to be aware of those things, you find your anxiety for each live show goes down,
mhm,
because you start to realize, when I'm here now, you're starting to get that flow state where, I'm going to be here, and it's going to look like this, and then I'm going to do that, and I know when I hit this beat, that one, and boom, then they laugh, or then I get the reaction and they cry, or you get that moment of wonder. And that is really like the huge benefit of doing virtual, is that at least you're in front of a camera, and the more time you can spend in front of a camera and, work on your act and watch something and do it, watch it, repeat. And that's, yeah, there's an enormous amount of benefit to that. Probably the most of anything you can do single-handedly that you can do passively, actually.
mhm. Yeah, I really like that notion of like moving the 1% rather than trying to jump that 20. Because often what I find with the filming too is like you start to see all those pieces that you didn't recognize when you were just up on stage. But so many people like you said earlier, it's hard enough to like come into your own and not judge trying to be other performers. But then when you get like the actual video in front of you, you're like, oh, I'm not that other person. And it's so much easier to compare because you have like the two products side by side. So just moving that like 1% each time and developing your own craft within that, which is always exciting to see. And like I don't know what your experience is like, so you can speak to this as well. But like I know for me, being on camera, the first time I watch myself back, I think it's terrible. And then the second time I go back to it, I'm like, oh, like, yeah, there's things I need to fix. But actually, it wasn't as bad as I thought the first time because when you see all those flaws, you go immediately to like, oh no, I'm way more awful than I thought. So I don't know if you've experienced that as well, but that would be my
Oh,
suggestion to anyone watching. Like, when you do film yourself for the first time, watch it back more than once because the first time it might just be, uh, you'll make it worse in your head than it actually is.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that a big part of how you conceptualize what you watch is in the language you use. So this is a really important thing I learned not too long ago was when you have anybody else watch that footage, say you don't want to, you just want to send that to your partner and just say, take a look at this and send them the footage for it. You're not asking them what did they think. That if you say what do you like, so what do you think? They are going to be in a mode immediately that they want to support you and they're going to protect your feelings. It doesn't mean that they're going to rip it apart, but a better question is what bothered you about that?
Mm.
Because what happens with that part of it is you're not asking, you're making it now third party, right? You're not saying, did you like me? Did you like what I did? If I say to my wife as an example, what bothered you about you watch the footage, what bothered you about the tabletop setup? And she would say, I just wondered why you didn't put this over there, only because I've seen you do that before. And I say, good point. Let's all I can do that part. Or when you said this bit, you got pretty wordy with this because I tend to talk a lot. Surprise, surprise. And she said, you need to shorten that part up. But other than that, I really liked it. And then they give you a whole bunch of compliments after. I really like this, and I like the fact that you did this way. And when you said that, it was really funny. And doing those, so it's not what do you think because there's no fence around that, right? You need to give the folks give them the playing field to play with. So if you say what bothered you about what you saw, and um, because what that's really, it's also giving some of that ownership to them as well, because it's not just, and that's also the same reason why I don't put that type of footage out to, a huge community and say, what do you think about this? Because you need people that also understand where you're coming from.
Mhm.
So to just put it out onto a Facebook group, for example, you're going to get, hundreds of comments from people that have no idea what you're trying to accomplish, which means that although everybody's opinion is valid to somebody, it doesn't pertain to what you're trying to do. And
Mhm.
that's not the point, right? And the whole idea with it. Yeah. So to that point, yeah, it's watch it multiple times and do also go through it. And because if you're working from a script as I am, for example, like what you can't see is behind this camera, I have a large TV and I have a set list on one side. I've got the instructions for a trick that's typically pretty, it has to be exacting in its language. And I have that just off site too. So when I can ask a question, I can read the next step and then go right to it again. And it's almost works like a teleprompter. So what that also means is when I watch the footage, I know exactly where I am when I'm sitting in this chair and from the other side of the camera.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it ends up being it's a really useful tool because we have all the things, right? We have all of the items at our disposal to make ourselves better at what we do and to accomplish, to be that strive for clarity in what we want to say through the medium that we enjoy.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, so when you think of like all the different like camera angles that you now have at your disposal and that, how does that change how you tell the story of your overall show?
Um, there's it means I guess I have to just be very aware of what I'm trying to say because again like I can show everybody right now what the way that this whole thing kind of operates. I'm running a television or an open source or open broadcast software, I should call it, OBS. And what that lets me do is I have a box here that has a bunch of different scenes. So for example, when the show gets ready to start, I can run this scene here where it just does a countdown to when the doors open. Then I have my front camera. I've got an overhead camera here, so it allows me to be able to show different things there. And I also have the ability to change the background because I'm using a green screen, so I can make different things kind of jump in and out as I need to do that. I have to limit my amount of use of those because if I start playing this like a cartoon essentially where I have things all over the place, it takes away from what's actually happening here because this is the skill-based stuff and
Mhm.
the rest of it would be production value. So I have to be there's that fine balance of doing the production value. And when it comes to designing the show, it becomes I have to think through what the audience member wants to see when I'm doing any given movement because I essentially have to be that mind's eye for you. So,
Mhm.
as an example, when I'm taking a deck of cards and I show you the one and I run through them this way, that although that's one way to do it, it feels like there's a lot of distance between us. But if I want to really give you a better look at it, when I square these up and then I jump to this view and you watch that go and it happens seamlessly, now anything that happens with a card trick is of course a lot. It just has more of a there's an intimacy there because you're now over my shoulder,
Mhm.
right? And then it just jumps back to where it has to be, where I can now tell the story. And it's just a matter of now with those is painting that picture so that I'm when I'm giving instruction or I'm telling a story from this perspective, and we're still working on these things like the transitions where when that moves to that image with my hands, it's still going to have my face in the picture. That's the next thing that we're going to be doing, and making sure that it's not just things moving around the screen all the time, right? We have to be that television producer side is really like that. It's a beautiful art form because that's the structure of how you tell the story. So
Mhm.
and but the main thing is we have tons of options for doing all this stuff, and the large majority of it is completely free. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So how did you find and gather these different tools? Like, how did they first like cross your path? And like, if people are looking at getting into more of the tools I guess, create a better show is a way of saying it. Um, where can they first start looking for what's available and what might work for them? Because I'm guessing different shows will have different tools that will be more beneficial depending on what it is you're trying to say.
Sure. Um, I think it depends on where you're trying to go with it. I mean, the one issue that I know talking to friends of mine who are musicians and that they we have to be very aware that we can often waste a lot of time trying to solve problems that don't get us any closer to our goal. Meaning, like you have, it's the old thing where I know a lot of people. I was one of them growing up, where before you cracked a book to study anything, you cleaned your room and did a whole bunch of other stuff. You have a bunch of that busy work that you do first, and we can do that as adults too, especially when you decide to. As somebody who can get hyper fixated, me, that when I decide to jump into something, I'll buy all of the things for it. And as soon as I have them all and I start playing with it, I realize I'm not really going to be using this stuff anymore. And then it sits forever and then just gets thrown away. And what I, the easiest way is start small first and
Mhm.
foremost. Just about everybody with a cell phone can do the majority of what you see here right now. I mean, the only difference I have with the setup I have now, it's a bit more of a professional rig, but the I for the longest time I used my cell phone camera and used a bit of software that I think $8 or $12, and it was a one-time payment and turned my cell phone into a webcam, and I did the show that way. I believe it's called IV Cam, and it was a uh, easy download. You just open that, and it communicated with Shaw or with sorry with Zoom and all those things, and you could then use that as your webcam, and away you went. And that's how I did it. And then you just start as you balance out that kind of what I would like to call the deposit withdrawal type of thing, right? Every time you spend money on that, it's a withdrawal out of that system. You need to put deposits into it to offset the withdrawals, right? So, and that's where when if you're going to look at doing a virtual side of things, I mean, the way we can advertise virtually is free, right? I mean, you're using your social networks. You can pay for additional things. You don't have to. You can push the ideas through the networks because the people that are going to support all of your early ventures are your family and friends. They're folks that want to see you win, and the biggest thing I guess that I learned in the last 6 8 months when I started doing the virtual side was I didn't know who was going to want to see me perform virtually, and I just put a post out on Facebook and I said, kind of just laying all that out there, saying this is where I'm at. I'm I'm not confident in this medium. I'm not really comfortable in it, but it's something I want to do, and I don't know who's going to want to see it, but if you're interested, just let me know and I'll invite you to the platform to be able to see it. And I had an overwhelming response from the people in my um, like the people in my circles that just said like, and it dawned on me, they don't know how to support you when you do this. When you're an artist, they don't know how to support you. They know that yeah, you may need a pat on the back every now and then. They want to do more because they're your friends and they're your family, and they just don't know how to. And but when you say I'm going to try something, and in order to do this I'm going to make it a ticketed event because there's things that I need to do that cost money that make this
Mhm.
work, but the exchange is going to be I'm going to show you something that I've never tried before, and in exchange you have a like you're one of the few people that get to see it. And they just piled into that, and the response was amazing. And it's still going now because when the folks post about it after online and say that they had a great time, I'm getting messages every day saying, "When are you doing the next one? When could we bring this thing together?" And I'm thinking, this is terrifying and awesome at the same time. I'm just not like, and it's so fun that way. But I guess that's how it starts. Is if you start with the very simple stuff, a webcam or a cell phone, your there's a lot of really good YouTube videos out there on kind of the importance of different things. I mean, you can get like I have lighting soft boxes here. That's just why the light's not beaming down on me. But um, you can go to Canadian Tire and I think 12 or $15, go to a hardware store. That one of those like LED packed lights with a shower curtain pulled over top of it is that gives you like a frosted shower curtain from the dollar store gives you a softbox. And then you just look at a YouTube tutorial about how you're supposed to position those for 3-point lighting, and then all of a sudden you'll realize it's way easier and way cooler than you thought it could be, and it happens fast. And it's instant gratification, which in the beginning I think everybody needs.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. How many iterations did you kind of go through before you got to recognizing like what was the best format for what your needs were and what you're trying to accomplish?
For the virtual show itself, I think this is the fourth iteration of it, because I worked on a few different things, and we're actually going to be going to a fifth very soon, where we're going to try without the green screen and build a set that we can work within, so that it gives me the opportunity to like the limitations I have now. It's great that I can work from here and you can see it, but I also can't stand and do
Mm.
what I need to do. And a lot of magic and illusion, like some really cool things that I really like doing, I have to do standing, and as a result, I can't do them in this position. Now, I can also take the time and learn how to do them from a seated position. I just have not been that motivated to do that yet. So we're going to try to essentially clean my room first before I study. We're going to rip the whole thing down and try to fix it before I come right back here and learn how to do that. But I mean, you're just going to watch it in real time, I guess. Yeah, so it's been 4 or 5 iterations of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and has it been like on your end, has it been like a smooth transition between them, or has there been times where, because I know like a lot of people in the pandemic are finding things frustrating and just like um yeah, was it difficult to decide when to make those shifts, or was it just like a natural flow between them?
It is as rickety and janky as you can get it, is what happens. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're doing when you're doing art in a way that is really personal to you, everything feels like it's like an unknown.
Mhm.
And that's what happened with this. Like I didn't know, like at first when I thought, oh, typical way that I would handle something, I had said, "Oh, I'm going to do a virtual show. I'm going to do this." So I bought a green screen and bought some lights, and I had this thing. And then when I put it all together, I realized sitting down in front of the camera, I was like, I really have no idea what I'm doing,
Mhm.
and I have no idea how to make this a show. And at that moment, after that initial panic hit me, the next stage was I just started reaching out to folks that I know that are really, really good at this, where making these shows work is their forte. And
Mhm.
there's lots of them out there. And artists, if you're looking at something and you're not sure how to get started, I mean, feel free to reach out to me and I will put you in the right direction for folks. I just that collaboration, like there's a lot of all of these things, you can't be experts in all of them. And because there's not enough time in a day for you to put the time in, but there are folks that you know, or folks of like that are friends of other people that you know, that like lighting. And if you have a photographer in your life, for example, they can sort out your lighting for a show really quickly, and they just, because that's part of their art, they know it. And this is where we're kind of blending some art forms together. It's video, it's audio, it's working on your, like the palette, color palette that you have behind is another thing. And there's a lot of different mediums that are kind of meshing together, which is really cool, because if you're open to learning it, then you can really learn a lot about your show. And also, it makes every show you did before better, because at this point, I know when I go back to working on stages, I can do a totally different set of video presentation that goes along with the show, and a lot of really cool, um, a lot of really cool video aspects that are going to build into this, with audio and sound and background washes and all this stuff that I couldn't do before, because I was never forced to pivot that way. And had I just picked it up and done it, it would have been different. But I was I was doing what I was always comfortable with, and this forced me to get out of my comfort zone. And it got me excited about doing magic again, which was
It's
a
awesome.
really awesome thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So this question has two parts to it. What is like your favorite thing about the this new medium that you feel like you've gained, and what is one piece of live that you miss that's just not translatable to that digital environment?
Um, the thing I love about it, and the thing that doesn't translate, is actually the same thing.
Oh,
I love that when I want to work on something new and I want to put it out onto a live stage, I don't have to wait to see what it's going to look like by having another theater gig or having another show at a casino and then go in front of an audience and try a piece. I can walk across my basement to my green screen studio, set up, do the thing, watch the video, cringe a little bit, watch it some more, figure out exactly what was making me cringe and why I didn't like it, and work on that thing. And then know when I bring that to the audience, when everybody tunes in, we're already on stage. So I have the theater at my house. That part I love. I love that I can be home, and when I'm done I can shut it off and I'm home already. And that's beautiful. The part that doesn't translate, that not the way I would like it to, I guess. There is nothing that can replace the sound of an applauding audience when that energy is there, and it's just like, it actually gets me choked up to think about it, because there's something so powerful about bringing people to that point where you hit that final thing and it just lights up a room.
mhm,
That is the best thing. That is the drug that happens with live entertainment. That um, I'm not I'm not saying that it can't happen through the virtual side. I just haven't found it in that potency yet. And
mhm,
but that again, that's why it's not a finished product. Why it's always going to be working on different things and working on different approaches and developing the presentation and the production side of it to give that type of to get that type of energy, because the energy that you have in a room when people are really, when everybody's vibing and they're having a great time, that is, there's nothing better.
mhm.
Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're all going to appreciate that so much more post-COVID, and like
Oh,
having this time where we don't have access to it, just the amount of gratitude and awareness we now have of what an advantage that is. And yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah, and I think the audiences, people are craving the live entertainment side, right? And that's a wonderful thing, especially in a lot of the smaller communities where a lot of the entertainers are typically well known, right? Because you know them and you've seen them before and everything else. But now it's been long enough that not only do you want to see what they're up to, but you miss the fact that it was always there and then it hasn't been.
Yeah.
And that's a really important part of it, because there is incredible talent across this country that um, from the little hole in the wall places to the biggest theaters. I mean, you could walk in and just have your mind blown by watching somebody, do their craft, and realize, like, and it happens in every small town in Canada, where it hits a certain level and you have people walk up and say, "What are you doing here? You don't
Mhm.
belong here." And you know what? They're part of the community, and that's an awesome thing, and that you don't get to really experience that many of those experiences in life. And I think that it's just a really important thing where everybody wants the same thing, and as long as we do the right things, we can get back to it.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So what have you found like the most difficult with being in the smaller community compared to uh, being in a larger place where you have like the more like it's just different, I guess, but like
Yeah, yeah. There's different markets, different things. I mean, it's the blessing and the curse is the same kind
Mhm,
of, and I wouldn't say it's a curse, but it's the positive and negative, I guess. The positive side is there's always a place that if you want to try new material or you want to put something together, it's it's really nice in a small community because the community rallies around you,
mhm,
and that's always a lot of fun. It's easy to get word of mouth out quite a bit further than it would be, say, there's not as much noise as there would be, say, in a Toronto or a Calgary or Vancouver, that type of thing. Where you're, although there's more people, when you get the bigger the city gets, typically the more individual people get, where it's less community. Not, I shouldn't say less community, less you that community is not as loud as it would be in the small communities. As an example, you can you can work your process to be able to get the word out, and you'll have a lot of people that talk to each other regularly. And I found that even when I was living and working in Toronto, although you may have been in a building with 1,000 people, you didn't know a single person.
mhm,
And I don't know that it made any difference, right? But in smaller communities, you know your neighbors, you know what's going on, and you always know somebody, or somebody knows someone who knows you.
yeah,
and and that works out to be really well. That I've that's what I've loved about Sault Ste. Marie, is that um, I've done this long enough in this community and worked at it to really bring magic to the city that when I go to work on something new, I have a lot of people that want to be involved in watching it and taking part in it. And I mean, selfishly, I would like to think it's because what I'm doing is it's hitting, it's resonating in a way. Um, but I love the idea that going out and supporting the community is something that we typically do pretty well.
mhm,
And yeah, and it's what it's why we have as many incredible musicians and artists, and and artists of all forms here. And that's why it surprises a lot of people when you hear how many musicians, as an example, are world class that come out of a city of 74,000 people.
mhm.
Right? It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are your plans for like you did mention earlier, integrating like the digital in a way for the live performance, but are you planning on integrating it so that it will still be available on online platforms after, or what are you, or
Yeah.
you might not know right now, but like, what are you thinking?
No, funny enough, we've been having a lot of this. The team of folks that I work with on this we've been talking about this a lot. We're looking at doing an integrated show where you'd be able to not only have the live show that would happen, but also have the visual side of it that happens from doing this, but also have the ability for folks that still won't be comfortable going into a room with that many people. They'll be able to still access the show and get the same experience from home. So, and that way they can also watch from anywhere in the world, right? And that's how we're designing out the show now, where you get the live portion, and it'll just take the right cameras and microphones and everything in the right order with the right amount of tech to make it work. And of course, I don't know the expertise on that. Friends of mine who are experts in that field know that side, and build out a show that you can then sell an online ticket and an in-person ticket, and have that type of blend, and essentially expanding the toolbox so that we're not limited by the medium that we're using.
Mhm. That's really exciting, and I'm sure viewers will love that they can still access it depending on their comfort levels and whatnot. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah, you know what? It's a thing that just needs to be. It has to have that kind of access to. And I mean, I think a big part of it too is also going to be if the experiences are done in such a way that you might see the virtual side of it first and say, I need to see this live
Mhm.
and get that, because I'm trying to with all the magic that I create, I try to create it the way musicians write songs because a lot of my friends are wonderful, incredibly talented musicians. And the way they look at songwriting, it's not, they don't write a great song with the idea that if you like that one, they're going to write another one. They will write another one, but that's on their terms. What they do is they write a song and you don't go to the artist to you don't go to a musician, singer, songwriter to hear them play cover songs. You want to hear their stories,
Mhm.
and you'll go to see the same storyteller over and over again because you like the way they tell their story. And that's how I work on my magic and illusion, where a lot of times now I bring in the odd new piece of magic, but I often hear, I want to see this trick again. I want to see that one again. Can you do this one again? And it's amazing because I would at first I would always think I have to bring all new things. Every show has to be brand new. And then I realized there folks are coming to watch the show because I'm not doing tricks anymore. I'm doing pieces of magic and they want to see that piece again.
Mhm.
And uh, that it's a really awesome thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great to hear. So I am noticing the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we start to wrap up here?
You know what? I think oh yeah, we've run for a while. I think I don't know that I have any other answers for anything, to be honest.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ryan, and for sharing all your knowledge, because I'm sure it will be valuable to people watching. Is there anywhere that people can go to follow you or to support you and find out more about the show?
The best is if you're, it's, I believe it's Ryan McFarling or McFarling Ryan, one of the two, for Instagram and YouTube, or Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. I do respond to everything. So if you have somebody that's interested or you have somebody in your life who might be interested in magic and illusion or questions about the tech side of things or anything that way, just reach out to me. I will get back to you, and if I don't know, I will tell you I don't know, and at the same time, I will find somebody that can help you. So, yeah, Facebook, Instagram, and also at www.ryanmcfarling.com. You can always reach out through there, and we can kind of connect all the dots that way too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and thank you for coming on to the podcast. Thank you to our viewers for watching. Merci, miigwech, gracias, and we'll see you all on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.